This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
First, I want to thank Alice Doland and Sally Holloway for organizing this conference under a wonderful and very inspiring heading. Research in museums is very much connected to the collections, and your call for papers exactly mentioned the materiality of objects as stimulating emotions, and very important that this connection has not yet very much been scholarly treated. Perhaps I'm disqualified to talk about objects as carriers of emotions, because it's a personal experience for me that clothes very strongly remind us of former owners, perhaps dead and gone a long time ago, and indeed remind us of their lives. In her book, Adorned in Dreams, Elizabeth Wilson touched exactly on that subject in the introduction when she, rather provokingly, compared the Dresde Museum with a world of the dead, with Egyptian tombs and with a place reminding us of souls in limbo. I quote, "For clothes are so much part of our living, moving selves that, frozen on display in the mausoleums of culture, they hint at something only half understood, sinister, threatening, the atrophy of the body and the evanescence of life." End of quote. You see in this picture the old part of my museum, the Old Town. We still rebuild historical buildings from towns all over Denmark and are now working with flat shops and workshops from the 1970s. But that's another story. In 2006 to 2007, the Old Town had a large exhibition of garments for christening from the 18th century to the present. More than 100 objects were exhibited. The Old Town owns a collection of historical dress and textiles which is the largest outside the Danish capital Copenhagen and has a really broad scope. Garments for babies remind us of the vulnerability of the newborn, and in this way I find that they are emotional objects. This set of clothes made me emotional while curating the exhibition. I know that it's very difficult to see in a slide, but this cap is very, very tiny. And indeed, it's the smallest in the collections of the Old Town. The measurements approximate a woman's fist. From forehead to the back of the neck, it measures 15.5 centimeters. It is dated just after 1800 and is made of striped silk rep with a lining of linen tabby. It is part of an attire consisting of cap, shoes, jacket and bodice. It is the smallness of the cap which is touching, and at the same time it is material evidence of either law-abiding parents or parents who had a heartfelt wish to secure their newborn in church, or both. In the Danish Law Code of 1683, the Danish Law Code of 1683 demanded that a baby should be baptized within 8 days of birth at the latest, or a penalty in silver had to be paid. That is, if no health problem prevented this. The law on baptism within 8 days of birth remained unchanged until 1828, when a new statutory instrument on baptism was released. Unfortunately, we know nothing about who was baptized in this attire. But whose emotions are in focus? My emotions were connected to the vulnerability of the newborn, but they're hardly relevant for scholarly treatment. And as we don't have any written documents from the parents, I can only guess about the emotions of the parents of this newborn. Fear of diseases, delight over a successful delivery, anxiety about having another mouth to feed, fear that evil should harm the baby before christening. We really don't know. So contemporary emotions connected to these clothes stopped in a dead end. But we know something about the spiritual and metaphysical environment in Denmark of the period in question. Denmark was a Lutheran Christian kingdom in the 18th century, with a few exceptions. In 1682, the town Fredericia was granted freedom of religion, civic rights, and rights of asylum. For a few years, this was a unique situation in the entire then Danish-Norwegian kingdom. But there was more to it. There was more to the situation than the established churches. The Danish historian and former professor of economic history at Copenhagen University, Ole Feldbæk, has written much and interesting about 18th century Denmark. I quote, "Denmark was a Christian country, but the population's scheme of things about life and death and the meaning of life were much more varied and multifarious than the official teachings of the national church." And he goes on writing about the everyday of the peasants as a cosmic unity with meaningful signs in the sky telling what to do not only with the soil and the animals, but also in matters of health and hygiene. How omens given by the weather and the nature were taken seriously and acted up to because they were comprehended as fate. But still, the Danes of the 19th century were not just standing while fate ruled their lives. I again quote Ole Feldbæk. Everyday life and working life was shrouded in incantations and litanies of pagan and Roman Catholic origin to prevent evil. To bless and to exercise were abilities of many, and if one's own or the power of one's neighbor was insufficient, then it was an advantage to have a vicar who could bless and carry out strong exorcism of the devil. End of quote. For sure, Ole Feldbæk presents the complexity of the metaphysical environment in this exciting century of enlightenment, and it bears importance for my subject today, that is, protective strategies hidden in garments for christening. The clothes in the slide stem from the manor Sostrup, and since the 1920s they have been interpreted as representing two strata of society, the fashionable counts and the old-fashioned peasants. I will present three different sorts of elements which might or might not be considered as protective strategies. The first is a red collar as protection. The next is metal as protection and coins as vehicles of good fortune. And third is ritual garments in new ritual contexts. In Danish pre-1800 depictions of babies, they are very often dressed in red. Of course, one should be very careful when interpreting this fact as a protective strategy, as many Danish researchers have done. But still, red is a very powerful color, which through time has been used as symbol of love, passion and blood. In the liturgical use of colors, the red color is described as being connected to fire, blood, love and the Holy Spirit, and that it symbolizes passion. In the year of the church, it is being used at Whitsuntide, and I quote the vicar Nanna Hauge. At Whitsuntide, we are reminded that the Holy Spirit came over the apostles as flames, or in Danish, very poetical, tongues of fire, which is the reason for the red color. As the color of blood, red is used at the only day of a martyr, the day of Saint Stephen, which is Boxing Day. End of quote. In epitaphs, you see quite many depictions of dead babies dressed in red or with red elements in their dress, often the ribbons used for swaddling. I compiled just a few to show you. If you want to see more of these fascinating epitaphs from Denmark or southern Sweden, please visit this homepage. Quite many of the christening mantles and robes are made of red fabrics or have red elements. The introduction of the colorful garments in Denmark is connected to a gradual change of baptismal practices from the Lutheran Reformation in 1536 to the beginning of the 17th century. During the second half of the 16th century, the complete undressing and immersion of the newborn was gradually abandoned, which meant that the baby could be dressed from home without considerations of having to remove its clothing again during the rituals. Around 1580, the common ritual was the pouring of water, the so-called infusion, and during the 17th century, the so-called aspersion, the wetting of the baby's head as today, had become the norm. These changes in rituals surely did not occur without controversy. But from the end of the 17th century, the newborn was dressed at home in luxurious clothes. The clothes themselves were seen as being protective and could later be used as a sort of cure for diseases. The garments were made of precious silks, printed cotton, often reused women's garments or furnishing textiles. I show you just a few examples of red garments for christening. A sleeveless mantle to your left, it is in fact the one in our collection with the oldest fabric, because it is end of 17th century fabric, the ones with the lions running up and down the baby, and 3 caps with red elements. The cap to your left and at the bottom are for boys, because the boys' caps were made out of 6 pieces of material, and there was not this connection with red for girls and blue for boys as we know today. It's much later. It was the construction of the cap which showed us for which sex. And the enlarged one, all of them are from the last quarter of the 18th century. And the enlarged one is for a girl, and we know her name. She was called Anne-Marie Nielsdatter. And in this slide you also could see another remediant, because apart from the use of the red color, one very often see metal in different forms being used in garments for christening. Here as metal lace, in a reused fabric with brocaded elements of metallic threads and as rosettes. And these sorts of garments were used in all strata of society. The Danish cultural historian Troels Frederik Troels Lund, who lived from 1840 to 1921, compiled large quantities of empirical information of many aspects of life in the Nordic country in the early modern period. He writes about metal as protection against evil. I quote, "The least careful, parents that is, were content with fastening a needle in the swaddling cloth. Other fastened 2, crossed crosswise, and yet others stitched a silver coin to the clothing, or put a pair of scissors, a thunderstone, a pair of pincers, or a couple of pages from the Holy Bible, and even a hymn book into the garments." End of quote. It is very difficult to have material proof of these protective strategies that were not permanently sewn into the garment. The same goes for the bread and the salt hidden under the garment. One garment in the collections of the Old Town, however, has a small pocket intended for a lucky penny. It is dated 1762. And there are other sources as well. For example, in an interview from 1914, Jens Pedersen told about his lucky pennies and small pieces of bread that he had in his christening robe in 1844, and which he kept for the rest of his life. Other garments in Danish collections have these pockets as well. When I was preparing for this paper, I told my colleagues about the salt and the bread and the coins, and one of my colleagues said, "Oh, my mother-in-law knew about this tradition. When my son Søren was baptized in 1971, she put coins on his pillow after christening, and her mother-in-law is a very old lady, still alive, so we asked her about this, about why she did it. And she said, oh, no, it was not a tradition from my hometown. No. It was because I heard a broadcasted paper about coins being used for baptism. So that she wanted to reinvent. So good thing that she was still alive, so we could ask her. Well, as a curator, you have favorite objects in the collections. And this is one of my favorites, because I was trained as social anthropologist, so I've always been interested in garments for rituals. And the last garment I can show you in my 20 minutes is this christening robe, my favorite, dated 1860. What is interesting about this garment is the reuse of a ritual garment into another ritual context. And therefore I liked the paper about wedding dresses very much. The robe was sewn by the donor's grandmother Anne Marie Poulsen in the Danish town Køge for her firstborn child. But what is interesting in our connection is that the Christian robe was sewn from an apron that Anne Marie Pedersen's grandmother wore at church. So it's around 1800, you know the fashion, and the very long aprons, nice aprons with tambour stitches that she wore for church, and then they reused this apron into a garment for christening. Why would she choose this apron? Would there be any consideration about protection of the newborn? We don't know. But perhaps ritual garments are comprehended as stronger or better than just another fabric. Now I jump to the period we are not supposed to talk about, but a lot of you have done already. During the 20th century, we have lots and lots of examples of reuse of ritual garments in the Christian robes. And I have started systematically to ask questions about this when accessing objects into the collections, to try in some way to get hold of at least some of the stories of the unstable system of objects that we keep in museums. While preparing this paper, I wondered whose emotions are at stake. It's a new field for me, and as I told you in the beginning, it's not new that there are emotions about objects, but how to treat them scholarly. Whose emotions are at stake? The loving and protective parents? Mine? Hardly interesting. Yesterday, you introduced a possible solution, some of you. The interaction between the love of the parents and probably fear of evil, combined with the curatorial work, has the aim of presenting the objects and their implications to the public. And I'll stop with a little advertisement, because I have written more about christening groups in this book, this anthology, which is published next year. It is part of the HERA project, Fashioning the Early Modern, and the Danish group edited this book.